Well, thank you so much for listening. This is a Common Rule podcast, and I am your humble narrator. My name is Danny. And today we've got a really special treat, and let me just kind of get long-winded here for a second, and I apologize, but I got to say this. One of the main reasons I got into podcasting was because I knew that I wanted to document musicians along with my photography in one way, shape, or form. That was, while the definite form that it took was talking about the creative process. The foundation for the creative process, or the idea for talking about the creative process, wasn't just photography. It was also music and all the musicians and friends I've encountered throughout the years. I noticed that the way that they create was more or less unique to them, of course, as unique as we all are, human and spirits and spiritual creatures of sorts, if you will. But that was always the idea. I set up my podcasting equipment. I bought a bunch of more or less, not to get into details, but the equipment I bought was to be able to podcast with multiple people in like a band at a time. Slowly that did progress into the creative process as far as, just me talking and then having guests on and talking about, having single guests on at a time. But the idea was always music, and that's really my foundation for creating, whether it's doing photography or whether it's doing anything else. And to go back to let's just say the roots of this thing is I always did want to have podcasts with all the musicians that I encountered, especially in San Diego in the early 2000s. And in the first part of let's just say, this is weird to say, but the first decade of the 21st century, that's where that area, I wish that I don't have too many regrets, but I do wish that I should have taken more video during that time, in addition to the photography that I was doing. But I really do wish that as far as podcasting goes, I would have been early on in having a long conversation with some of my friends during that time period. I think capturing them at that time would be very interesting. But of course, being about 15 years later, it's very nice to see a portrait of what it was like back then and who is still here. I think that hopefully one of the things that comes out of this conversation with Grandpa Drew is that how important community is. And I think if you guys have been listening, I really am into that, in creating a community of artists. And that's exactly what Grandpa Drew has. And he's going to explain, and we're going to talk about the extreme benefits of having a community and how much you can grow and how much you can keep creating after so long. I think that's very important to note, is that some of us, and I talk about this in the conversation with Grandpa Drew, is that we talk about people that give up on creating because probably who knows why. And sometimes it's such a shame to see a talented person with artistic tendencies to just not want to do something anymore. And I think that having a community, having the people to talk about stuff is so important. And things like the Flim Flam are always so important. There are people and places, there are people that I've continuously seen, and if we're not, they're acquaintances, we're not all the best of friends, but we all know each other, I think, and seen each other's faces. And it's been years now since. And people still continually come back and gravitate to the same cool crowd of artists that hang out and create stuff. Anyway, I hope you guys have been doing well. And this is the conversation with Grandpa Drew. Enjoy. So, all right, we're starting. Hey, I think this is a long time coming for this podcast. I'm happy to have Grandpa Drew on the podcast here today. We're recording in his awesome house. some people might actually know the house. Not that we're going to give your address away, but right off the bat, you're known for having what is definitely the best Halloween party in Southern California, which puts you in the running for best Halloween party in the world. Actually, let me ask that before we get, because I think it's so San Diego, I think. Do you remember the first time you put a Halloween party, or you decided to organize one Halloween party, and when it got, well, let's just...
out of hand?
Out of control, yeah.
Yeah, well, it started at my mom's house, actually. My mom started throwing Halloween parties, and it was really more of a family party. And so those, the Halloween parties that my mom threw were always pretty epic, too. If you've been to mine, they grew to something that is on another level entirely. But my mother's parties were always pretty well known as being pretty hugely epic. My mom, since I was a little kid, was really, really into Halloween. So she started dressing me up as a small child and putting me in Halloween costume contests because she's a seamstress. And so she would just make the most amazing outfits, and I won every single thing I went into, which explains why I'm a musician, because she trained me to be a narcissist right from day one. Right. So she started it with her, and so she would always make these amazing, lavish costumes. And so originally it was probably more about the costumes than the house decoration, but they were always really huge parties where everybody really, really got into the spirit of it. And so I took that, and then with my stage experience, I guess, in theater and love of theater and stuff, I kind of started doing things that were on a whole different level on the house. But I even started that at my house, at my mom's house in Bonita. So, I was an adult still in college. And so at some point, the parties kind of transitioned from my mom and my family to all my friends coming over too. And then pretty much it was just all my friends. And that was even before I moved out. And then when Allison and I first moved in together, I had my own space. I was super excited, but it was tiny, and we had a little party there, and that was in North Park on Whiteman, and we did another one up in Normal Heights when we moved there. And then from there, we moved to this house that we bought that you were mentioning that everybody knows. And I think it's really interesting what you say about people knowing my house, because a lot of people know my house and I don't even know them. And it's really interesting because that the last Flim Flam review, which we'll get into what that is later on, but at the last after party, and this happens all the time to me, we'll have an after party, or we'll have people over, and somebody will be standing in one of my rooms and they'll look around and they'll say, did you used to throw a Halloween party? I've been here before. And I don't even know who they are. I just met them that night, right? I just brought them over. So.
Well, I have first-hand experience with that. I brought my friend over once, and she came in here, and the exact same reaction. She's like, I've been in here. There's been Halloween parties here. And she met you, and she goes, you were the owner? And she's like, yeah. She's like, nice to meet you, sort of thing. But yeah, it's that's how many people showed up at. I have. I don't know how to count people in a room. It seems like my whole thing is like, I know what 250 people fit in the room in the Casbah or something like that.
Yeah, we had at least 200 people at any given party.
It seems like 500 people when they're outside.
Wouldn't shock
people
me.
Over there.
Yeah,
it really huge. Seems like it's like you look at these movies where the frat house has a party and it's out of control, or even that kid in Australia has that party. That was happening every Halloween here for years, right?
Yeah, it was. It was every single room in my house was a different theme. Mm-hmm. And I mean every single room, the bathrooms, the guest rooms. So I guess I need to describe my house a little bit. My house was built in 1908. So when I bought it, it looked like a haunted house anyways. It kind of was haunted in a way, but not in the way you want by living ghosts. It was a meth lab, and a bunch of junkies were living here. And so after I'd chased them all out with a baseball bat, we completely redid the house, and it was really a labor of love for me to take this house down to the studs and rebuild it. And so I didn't make this house just for me, though. I've always entertained. My mother has always entertained. My father, when my parents were married, they always entertained. Our house was a social hub all the time, so I grew up with that, and that's very important to me to kind of offer that social hub. So when we rebuilt this house, I built it for entertaining. I built this giant deck on the back, with a buddy of mine, and it's gorgeous. This deck has stood for 20 years now, and it's hosted so many amazing people and so many amazing events. The Halloween party was just the start. And that Halloween party was really important. The reason I don't do it anymore, why don't I do it then, given that, is because it became a 4-month project. Literally, I had to take time off work, and I built a ride in my front yard. There was a 20-foot by 9-foot wide by 24-foot long ride, like you would see if you went to a carnival, right? And the germination of that was going to carnivals thinking, well, if somebody can put a ride in a tractor trailer, I should be able to build one at my house.
Yeah. There's video of it. There's a little video of it on my page.
You took some video of it the day after, so it didn't look quite as glorious, but you could at least see it functioning and working. Yeah,
and it's really, like I said, you put in a lot of magic in what essentially is just your driveway.
Yeah, exactly. And that driveway, I made a complete ride. It was a big circle, and it had all like a carnival ride, like they call them a dark ride is the traditional term for those kind of rides, where you're in a cart and the bar comes down, and it's not a high speed thing. You're maybe going 5-10 miles an hour at the most, but probably more like 5. But it's lots of tight turns in small dark spaces, right? And it's all just about this herky jerky thing. And I was really, really stoked to find that after I built it, it really had that feel because it was homemade. It had that same feel as being in a carnival where, half the terror is whether the ride's going to fall apart on you, right?
Right. Yeah. It really is amazing. You when you see it through, when you're a little kid and you go to the fair, you're visualizing one thing in your head, but as a grown man and you look at this in the driveway, not only is it nostalgic, but it's downright fun. It really is like, that's how much fun I was having when I was a little kid. And you killed it with the ride, man. A whole lot of...
And building that was fun, too. It was a whole community project. So I had the idea for a long time, and we had the party for years before I got that ride. It was only maybe the last 2 or 3 years that I had the ride, right? And but it was in the process, in my brain for over 5 years, just kind of bubbling around. And I finally, the internet, as it finally became larger and larger and a bigger source of information, I found some, basic plan that as soon as I saw it, I said, okay, I can do that. Mm-hmm. And, I'll have to modify it for my specific space, but somebody's done this in their house. I know I can. Yeah. And as soon as I saw that, then there was no stopping me.
Yeah, it really is amazing. Hopefully, at one point, of course, I know it's so much work for you, but at one point I'd like to see it just like, one more time,
I'm not saying no. For a long time I did. I'm not saying no. Allison and I, during the pandemic, talked about, if maybe it might be time to bring it back at some point soon. The biggest thing is, and the biggest reason I stopped doing it, well, there were 2 reasons. I stopped briefly because somebody stole from us. And I spent thousands and thousands of dollars putting this party together, right? And like I said, at the peak, it became, by the time I had to build the ride and then dress every single room in the entire house, because the ride was just the pinnacle of it. You get into the house, like the front room, we still have little pieces of it around, but right as you walked in the room, it was a voodoo room. So we had this, we had voodoo dolls everywhere, and that was kind of the theme of the very first room you walk into, which is the living room. And then right in front of that is our dining room, and that was a carnival room, and I literally put a big top in. So we had, from the very center, we had fabric that made it a complete big top in there, red and blue, and so it looked like a big top. We had like a little puppet theater with all these kind of terrifying little puppets in it. Mm-hmm. And then we had a bunch of full size. You can buy all of this stuff, by the way. Everything I did, now you can go to Party City and just buy the whole thing. Mm-hmm. I made everything. Yeah. And so you go to Party City, or even if you go to Home Depot, you see all these amazing things that they have there now, and I look at them and I drool. I made all those things I made from scratch. I had animated people. I had things that, I had full-size figures that were clowns, and some of them moved,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so we had automation. Every bathroom was themed. One of the bathrooms was the 3 little pigs, and so I kind of took a twisted, dark take on that, and I had the 3 pigs on stakes. Well, 2 of them on stakes, and then one was in his little brick house, and I just basically took all of the the doors off the cabinets of my my bathroom. And then I lined that so it looked like it was in a brick house, and I put the little pig that lived in the brick house, and I put the other two on stakes in a blood-filled bath, and then I just splattered the entire bathroom with blood, just everywhere.
Yeah.
And there was footprints with blood, and then the hunter, the woodsman, was outside looking in the window,
Mm-hmm.
and then I had a lightning machine. Again, you can buy these now, but I built mine from scratch.
Yeah.
And I had a lightning machine that would flash, and then you would see the hunter in the window with his axe looking in at you, and it was all really pretty terrifying. And,
Yeah.
and right next to that was the Little Red Riding Hood room, so kind of both of those stories kind of have little crossover themes in them. So I was able to kind of use the hunter in both of those. And
Yeah, I mean, there was the attention to detail was just amazing overall. To where I wonder if somebody like these Home Depot or these big box stores now, or someone came in here, saw what you did, and goes, I need to mass market this for the world, and somehow just stole your ideas.
I mean, that it seems hard to believe, but there is no doubt that I would do something, and almost always a year or two later, I would see it at Party City.
Yeah.
And all these little triggers that I had. So I had a grandma in a rocking chair, and her rocking chair rocked.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a huge task for me to figure out how to take an electric motor and attach it to my rocking chair, because I was using a real rocking chair, not something light like a prop, and it was a real antique rocking chair. And it took me a long time to figure out how to get that thing to rock, and then also hide the mechanism so it didn't look cheesy. And now you can just go down and buy those.
Yeah. Hey, man, and hopefully people build their own haunted houses and get inspired and do something in that. Well, nobody's ever going to approach what you were doing, but
I have so many bodies in my attic. That is the. if somebody ever searches my house, like if the police ever came in, which I've probably given plenty of reasons, if they ever did a search, when they went into my attic, man, they'd be in trouble until they figured out everything was just fake, because they would just find body bags, literally just plastic garbage bags with probably 30 bodies up there, of clowns and old ladies, and then the old man ticket taker. What else did we have besides the clowns? We had the guy hanging. We had the woman on the trapeze. Remember the woman in the corner over here on the trapeze?
Yeah. Yes.
There was that, and then this room here, our front office. That was the torture chamber, right?
Yes.
So that was all brick, and we had a giant. I used an easel, actually, an art easel, that and made that like a torture rack. So I had a guy stretched out on the rack, and
that was very impressive too.
Yeah.
So everyone, the layperson might know you from Halloween, but let's get back. Let's see what why. Here's my first impression. When I first got to know you, or when I first met you, I didn't know your real name. I thought it was Grandpa Drew, and everybody called you Grandpa Drew. I want to go at the beginning, and of course, you've told me this story before, but I want to know how you got the name Grandpa Drew, because I think actually it's kind of important as to where we're going to go with your arc of your, let's just say, your foothold in San Diego history.
Well, I also want to point out, I think that the beginnings of Grandpa Drew are very tied to the beginnings of our friendship as well, brother. Mm-hmm. I really feel that way very strongly. It happened very similar in time. The locations were very similar. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the first time we met was in Austin, Texas, and if it wasn't there, it was certainly when we got to know each other. Right.
That's like, I keep thinking to where I might have seen you at a transfer show, but we hadn't formally met, and then we got to know each other in Austin with that.
Yeah, that sounds more right. And so a lot of things happened at once here. My grandfather died, and Napster, and so let's start with Napster, because that's really where Grandpa Drew came from, right? So when Napster started, I'd given up music. I hadn't played for almost 10 years. Coming out of high school, I was in some bands. We had some moderate success. We played with, we weren't huge, but, we got to play with TSOL, which was exciting to me, even though it wasn't the good version of TSOL. And, we had some signs that we were up and coming, but in the end, we imploded the way most young bands do. But most importantly, I lost some really good friendships in that. And it took me a long time to recover. And so I turned away from music for almost a full decade. And it was also, I'd graduated college. I met my wife. You start to try and establish yourself as an adult. And so I was trying to do that, and I hadn't been able to find any balance where I could fit my music in there, and I ignored it forever. And after a decade, I was going crazy. I didn't really even understand it at the time, but I had like a midlife crisis in my mid-30s, and I left my wife, I left my home, I ran away to Amsterdam. I just kind of lost my shit in general. Can we cuss on this thing?
Yeah.
And so, good, because Grandpa Drew cusses all the time.
There you go.
And even occasionally refers to himself in the third person like a complete douchebag.
It's all right. I love Ricky Henderson.
But okay, so it started as, the short story is really easy. It started as a screen name on Napster. I was working in an office, wearing a suit and tie, getting up and going to work 9 to 5 as a mortgage broker. And it was soul-sucking. It wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. But it was my mother's company. I graduated college. She took care of me, and she needed help. And I thought it was important to pay that back to her. And I don't regret a minute of it. But there's no doubt that it was really killing me as spiritually. And so then Napster comes along. And at the same time, this is really funny because a lot of people this is a San Diego band that a lot of people bag on, Blink 182, right? And so they were still just Blink at that time. The Reader came out with an article on Blink, and Blink was one of the very first bands, as far as I know, in the entire world, who understood the power of the MP3. MP3s were brand new. Nobody knew what an MP3 even was. What does this mean, this digital music? And I remember reading this article, I think it was in the Reader, because I don't think even the City Beat was out at that point. And it talked about how Blink very consciously tapped into MP3s immediately. They knew that this is the future. And the minute I read it, I had some friends working at a company called mp3.com, so I was going to quit my job and go work for mp3.com. I thought that was the future that, for me, was not in music, was going to be on the backside of music. I was kind of over. I was still pretty kind of hurt and traumatized with the idea of actually being an artist and being in a band and being a musician. So I thought I'd work the backside. So I went and visited my friends. I took the whole tour of mp3.com, which is this amazing facility, and it was kind of the prototypical, like if you've ever watched, what's that show about all the tech geeks up in the Bay Area? There was a comedy. Silicon Valley, right? So the mp3.com was kind of one of the prototypes for that campus. When I walked in, or all these kind of campuses, right? When I walked into that place, it was unlike anything I'd ever seen in before. Talk about my Halloween party. It was like, imagine that for an office space, right? All the walls were corrugated metal. I mean, it just looked like a rock and roll MTV movie set in there that they could shoot a music video in any given space. They had all the creative spaces and places for people to just chillax and party afterwards. And the whole idea was now we've seen the sinister side of that, right? The whole idea is to create this place that you never want to leave, right? You go to work and it's a blast, and that's all well and good as long as it's a blast until they're actually using that to keep you there, right? So mp3.com was there, and then Napster came along, and I became a chat moderator for Napster. And as an open Nap server, these servers that ran right alongside Napster, but they use the same software. You log into Napster and you can pick which channel you go into, right? And so a lot of the channels were private, and they were just somebody in their house, just with a computer running these things. But from there, you could meet people all over the world, and I did. And I started trading music with people, and my love of music came back big time, very quickly. And so all these things kind of happened at the same time. And so I'm thinking about heading to Napster, to mp3.com. I'm a chat moderator on Napster, and one of the biggest jobs as a chat moderator is to keep prepubescent boys from sexually harassing girls. That's basically it, right? Especially in Napster at that time, you had a lot of 15-year-old boys, unchecked testosterone, knew dick all anything about how to deal socially with women, or they wouldn't be on the internet 9 hours a day, right? And I don't want to hit that cliche too hard, because I met a lot of really important people during this time, two of which were other moderators who lived in Austin, Texas. And when I started talking about music, they said, you need to come to Austin. We have the biggest independent music festival in the entire world, South by Southwest. And they hadn't even finished a sentence, and I was like, where do you live? Where can I book the flight? Yeah. And But so going back, though, to just backtrack, because the original question was Grandpa Drew, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where did I come up with that name? I started that as a screen name because it was a way for me to control these kids and have some sort of power that was diplomatic. Because we didn't really have the technology to shut these kids down. Any of these kids could have shut all our servers down across the entire world. So it's kind of a hollow threat to tell them I'd shut them off the platform if they could just shut our whole platform down. And they did. We had those problems.
Oh, really?
And so the only way to ban somebody effectively from coming back and then just shutting everything down, you couldn't just do IP bans just based on somebody's individual IP. You had to ban basically in a whole country or sometimes a whole region. So, you kind of used shaming a lot, right? So, Blue Balls 85, crashes your server, and then nobody from Australia can get on for X amount of time.
Damn Australians.
Right? And then you allow, and it turns out this jerk's from New Zealand and all these Aussies are pissed off. It's not even their fault, right? Mm-hmm. But so you make sure that everyone knows it's this guy's fault, right? So you use social pressure, right? So you always have to, there was all these like psychological ways where you had to try and regulate behavior. What I came up with was Grandpa Drew. You don't want to piss off your old Grandpa Drew, do you?
Yeah, that's right.
And so I had this whole shtick. I would like walk into the room, right? You virtually do all these things, right? And, there's ways, if you spend any time in chat rooms, there's all these kind of, ways of typing. And so, I would walk in the room and I would throw quarters in the air and I'd pull quarters out of the kids' ears and, do all this silly shit. And it was all just a shtick to endear myself to them. And it worked because then I could take them aside. If I saw them doing bad behavior, I could take them into a private room and talk to them. And they would listen to me because they respected me. Uh-huh. Because I created this complete character. He's a false character, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if they actually knew who I was, they wouldn't have respected me.
You're not, at this point, well, not to say, but you're not much older than any of these kids on there.
Well, I am. I was in my mid-30s, right? And they're like 15 and like one of the kids actually ended up coming and visiting me too. And he was really young, and I remember him talking to me. He had an issue with his testicles, and he didn't know anybody to talk to. And he was in England. He had actual proper health care. He should have gone to a doctor, but he came to me. And but that was kind of the relationship that ended up having. I had this relationship with a lot of these people that was like they looked at me as their grandfather, or at least some sort of father figure. And this guy in particular, we're still friends. He has a wife and kids now, and a wonderful family. But yeah, he ended up years after Napster closed. He came over here and he stayed with Allison and I. And in the same vein, at the very beginning, I went to Austin to meet this other couple who were chat moderators. We stayed with them. Allison and I both stayed with them. And when we were there for South by Southwest, it became very clear this is what I needed to be doing. I needed to get back into music somehow. This is where my heart was. This is where my soul was. And I decided from that day I was going to start a record label. And while I was there, I'd met a couple bands, and I talked to this one band called Oranger, awesome band. And I asked him what it would take to sign them, and I was talking to the drummer, and he said, "You buy me a snare drum, I'll convince the rest of the
band." Drummers, man,
right? Drummers, you got to keep your eye on them. But and he was half serious though, and it occurred to me, it's like, well, I'm making a lot of money at the time as a mortgage broker. It wasn't fulfilling, but I had a pretty good little nest egg that I'd started to build up. And I was like, well, why don't I just put out other people's records? Why don't I, then I can get, roll up my sleeves and get involved in music creation, but have a little more power and a little more control and not put myself in such a vulnerable position. And so I started a record label. And the first band I tried to sign was Matthew Strakota's band, Bartender's Bible. Mm-hmm. And that didn't go well because their singer sussed me out as green and not really knowing what the hell I was doing very quickly. Right? Mm-hmm. They'd been signed by independent labels, and it became very clear that I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't really have anything to offer anybody. I mean, money's not enough, and I didn't have that much money anyways. Mm-hmm. But it was enough, what I thought, to put out a record and get somebody on the road, and that was about it. And we could build from there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I tried to sign Matt's band. It became very obvious that I really didn't know what I was doing. So I decided to put my own record out, and then I had to name it. And so when I came time to name it, I started thinking about it. Well, how do I already had this name, Grandpa Drew, that was internationally known, literally. I had people all over the world who knew who I was, and including people in Austin, Texas, a very important place that I wanted to establish myself as a music producer or whatever I was going to be, right? And so when Matt's band didn't sign me, I decided I didn't need to make my own record and at least put a record out and understand how the process worked. So I bought instead of putting the money into another band, I bought music equipment. I built a studio in my garage, and I made my first EP, Grandpa Drew, and I named it Grandpa Drew, the project, in homage to what brought me back to music, what brought me back to everything I loved, what brought me to Austin and South by, which was so important, and it become really important to our friendship, and so. So yeah, that's where Grandpa Drew came from.
Man, it really, what's tripping me out right now is that you tell this story and it really just seems like it happened yesterday. But that's not. This is early 2000.
Absolutely, 2000. 100%, yeah.
And we didn't touch base until about 2000. Well, by 2005, we were pretty much, I guess, transfer is the key to this, and we'll get to the transfer show in a second. But transfer, and then I'm sure we saw each other around there. But yeah, right when they did their Southwest tour, that's when, and now that's 17 years ago now.
Yeah, right? It's been so long, right? And that trip in particular was really important too. It was a turning point because I put that Grandpa Drew record out as just a proof of concept. I hadn't convinced myself that I was going to go back into being an artist. I've always been a writer. I'm a writer first before being a musician. But I was not a particularly prolific songwriter at the time. I'm still not. But I didn't even really respect myself as a songwriter, right? So how could I really produce anything of worth? And I mean, I did. I definitely wrote some good songs in my youth, and that I'm still play today, and I'm really proud of. But it took me a while to find my worth and to trust that. Right. And so that's why that journey was a little bit circuitous. Right. And so I went to Austin, and that really I got a lot of trust in that trip that we met, my grandfather had just passed away, and I wrote that very trip that we wrote, right. I wrote what would become the title track to my first full length record, right, is Cut from the Cloth. And I wrote that in a hotel the night before I met you.
Oh, really?
And I had literally driven from Oklahoma, where I had buried my grandfather. I had to give his eulogy. It was one of the heaviest things I'd ever done, right? And so from that exact trip, I got 2 songs out of just that trip because one, for my grandfather's passing, and then my Uncle Butch, there was an incident that I don't want to go too deeply into it, but my Uncle Butch was a violent man, and he showed himself over that period in a way that I didn't appreciate. And so I wrote a song called Butch. Both of those are on my record, Cut from the Cloth. And so I wrote both of those right then. I go to Austin, Texas for South by Southwest. I meet you. I meet up with my friends in transfer. You guys are all staying in this hotel. There's no furniture. I mean, not a hotel, in an apartment. It's like a 2-bedroom apartment, or maybe only 1 bedroom. I don't know.
I think it might have been 2 bedrooms.
But it was empty. There was nothing. There was no furniture in it. It was just a space. You guys were all literally sleeping on the floor. There might have been 1 couch.
Yeah, there was 1 couch.
Yeah, and that's it.
But we'll get into that story. I'd like to see how, probably if I ever get one of those cats on here. It was a good story. But basically, that whole situation came about just like we went to I was obviously touring with Transfer as a shitty-ass roadie and a photographer. I'm on record as saying I'm probably the worst roadie that ever existed. But a fantastic photographer. We'll see if it makes up. I'm still working on that documentary 15 years later, right? But their first stop was at this bar called not Egos, but Emos.
Yep.
And the bartender really dug them, and she's all, "Where are you guys staying?" They said, "We're going to figure it out." She's all, "Nope. You guys are staying at my spot." And she's all, "I don't have anything in there anyway, but I'm house sitting for somebody. You guys have at it all week long." We were there for what, about a week?
Yeah, almost? The whole week of South by, pretty much. Yeah, you guys left maybe a couple days earlier because I think you went to Dallas after that, and I stayed for the rest of the week. But I had my own hotel. I we'd been going to South by for a few years by then because I'd already been brought out by my friends, Kara and AJ.
Yeah.
And so we used to get there's like a little, you could get it for $35 a night. I laugh now. It's crazy. But for $35, we could get a corporate hotel room, but it was on the wrong side of the river. And now that's where everyone stays. It's super. I think actually you mentioned Emo's. Emo's is right there now where I used to stay. That used to be the wrong side of the tracks. It used to be a seedy spot, but I could get it super cheap. And so I was staying in this corporate place at which was key because it had a kitchen, right? And so then I could afford to eat the whole week. And so I was staying there and I wrote that song, and then you guys took off. But that was really important because watching Transfer, they were hugely influential to me. Not just because I love their music, but just to see their work ethic and to see them go at it, right? Yeah. And really try. And, we spoke a little earlier about commerce and art off tape, and we'll get into that probably on tape at some point too. Yeah. But it was really refreshing to see somebody who I respected as artists immediately, but also had a business sense. Maddie knew what he wanted, and Jason too, and they were driven, and it was interesting to see those two things in concert, right? And a lot of people just think I'm just going to make art for art's sake, and certainly if you're doing art, that's where your heart has to be first. But I'm also an advocate for people understanding their worth. Yeah, and the most impressive thing that came out of that whole thing to me, just to note on how hardworking, because I think we are going to talk about the art versus money thing. These cats, one night, we stayed up probably till like 5 or 6 in the morning doing what musicians do, having fun. These cats got up and had a show at 11 in the morning in what ended up being some gravel parking lot or something like that. And I got up and went and saw them, so I want credit for that. Yeah, too. You were there too. I have pictures of that for sure. And they put on an amazing set. They were there on time, had their shit together. We're all sweating balls. Green as hell. Dude. I don't mean green and inexperienced. I mean green from drinking and being up late. Those are the two things we did. But I tell you what, some of my favorite photographs that I took were that morning, I guess, with you in there as well. But that's just a testament to how hardworking, and they're just an example. We know a couple other people too that are very serious about their craft, whether they are making money at it or not. I want to make sure that I get this in here, that you are very important to me in that aspect too. Walking into that apartment and meeting you and seeing you work, and you worked hard during that. I mean, you can talk shit about yourself on your roadie all you want, and I won't comment on that. I have no idea what you did or did not do as far as carrying equipment. I'll believe you when you said you were slacking on it, but I won't believe you if you tell me you're slacking as a photographer, because you weren't. And I watched you work, and for the first time, I felt like I was in a family of artists, and it was really important to me, D. It really was. I'm getting fucking tears in my eyes right now thinking about it, because there's a photo that you took of Jeremy in the kitchen of that bathroom, and I mean, the kitchen of that apartment. And I remember walking in, and it was on a laptop. And I remember walking into the room, and this is really just a nondescript apartment that was built in probably 1980. There was nothing special about the place at all. It was bare walls. Like we said, there was only one couch. I guess there must have been a little table in the dining area, because that's where the laptop was, right? And so there was a photo that you had just taken, maybe the night before, or maybe that morning, who knows, of just the kind of the group in the kitchen. And it was such a gorgeous photo. And standing there and looking at the area and looking at the subject, there was no fucking art there. There was nothing that I saw that was artistic. And then I look at the screen, in the same space, through your eyes and through your camera, was gorgeous. And it was fucking amazing. It was incredibly moving. And I'll always remember that, D. Thank you. And so later on, that you talk about that photo that you really loved after that day show, right around the corner, and where we're all trying to figure out whether we're going to go to another bar or just puke on the street right there. And that's a gorgeous photo too. And there's nothing really, I guess, is that street photography? I don't even know what you would call that. I mean, we were on the street, right? Right. Yeah, we were on the street. So it qualifies. Yeah. But, you were shooting in black and white, and so that automatically means art, right?
No, yeah, that's an argument I will take to my grave. Yes, is it in art just because it's in black and white? Yes, yes, it is.
Now it's art.
Yes,
but obviously it's way more than that, and you've got it, D, and that was really important to me, and so that trip was really huge. We got to play Pootie's Roadhouse.
Oh my God, yeah.
And that was a really important moment in the beginnings of Grandpa Drew. It was like one of the very first shows I'd ever played. I had not really played maybe only 1 or 2 shows ever.
Mm-hmm.
And in over 10 years before I was in a band, I wasn't even, I wasn't a front man. I certainly wasn't writing my own music and singing it myself.
Oh,
right?
wow.
And so that was one of the first times I'd ever performed. And a funny thing, so we're at Pootie's Roadhouse. We have to give that up too.
Yes.
Right? Pootie was the road manager for Willie Nelson, for over 30 years, 35 plus years.
Rest in peace.
And so, yeah, that whole experience was amazing, too. And Transfer was kind enough to let me sing that song that I'd just written the night before, cut from the cloth. And I did it, and probably not my best performance, but I got through it, and it was a huge, really important thing. And just you guys all allowing me to pretend that I was on the same level as you at that point was really important to me. And I know now we'll both look back at that, and that statement seems sort of silly, but that's how I felt at the time, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great night. It was I didn't, now that you say it out loud, and you probably might have mentioned that before, but you took to the stage very well, like Pig the Mud. I didn't realize you were more or less making a comeback and coming back and hadn't played on a stage in a long time, and it was like I saw it like, how come I haven't seen you play in a while? How come you never heard of me? Because I was nobody. I hadn't done anything. Yeah. And I was like, okay, well, and then that's just the whole, where it came from, or what got the ball rolling to where we're at now. So I wanted to mention Pootie real quick. Pootie is a larger-than-life Texan gentleman, I think.
Absolutely.
When he walked around, he carried a little jar of cherries soaked in moonshine, and was more than happy to share with everybody that got anywhere near him. I felt nothing. This
might have been a Texas trick that they play on, the yokel Californian to come out like, hey, can I have some of my cherry?
Yeah, that's true too. But one of those cherries in that moonshine is probably what amounts to a double shot of bourbon, and I had 2, and they got me buzzed. I don't know what those moonshine down there. Oh man. But I do want to say this about Texas and where we're at. Pootie's is on the outskirts of Austin. It's not Austin proper, and I think a lot of times people there's Austin is, what do they call it? The San Francisco of Texas or what have you, and it's very more liberal in a centralized location. Otherwise, I want to say we got treated very well at Pootie's, and I don't know. I just want to go on record saying that Pootie's, everyone was great. One of the first things that happened when we were all sitting at the table, a guy came up and he bought all of us, and there was probably there was 12 of us at least. He bought us a couple buckets of beer. He's like, I don't even know you guys. I see that you guys aren't from around here, and I'm not sure if I'm going to like your music or not, but I want you to know that you're welcome here, and this round's on me. And I thought
that's
that
right.
was,
I forgot about that when we're sitting at that big long table.
And I thought that was just such a big motion, a big gesture to make for somebody that just walked in there. That, I mean, let's be honest, a lot of us stood out inside of what is really an honest to God country western bar.
No, this was a real honky tonk that was on the outskirts. It's in the hilltop. The hill country, Austin Hill Country is what they call it. Yeah, and it's a real honky tonk. It's not. There aren't any tourists there. Even during South by Southwest, where the entire world descends on this place, I don't think there was a single person there besides us from out of town.
Right. I mean, the biggest cliche thing that we can describe it is the scene in Blues Brothers, where they went and they asked him what kind of music y'all play, and she's all, we play both kinds, country and western.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they played behind the chicken wire sort of thing. of course, that's an exaggeration, but to say
but
that...
it's not too far. I actually want to I want to point out, actually, on that, I mean, there was no chicken wire and nobody threw a bottle at my head. But when I did get off stage, I had this... because I would do the convention, like Transfer was going there to work, right? And I was too. I would do the convention during the day because at that point I still thought I was starting a record label, not becoming an artist that would make my own music. And so I had this hat though. So, and as always, one thing I'm not shy about branding myself, right? And so I had this hat, and I had just seen online somewhere, I don't know where I found it, some gimmick shop, but it was like a rhinestone belt buckle. And at the time, it was like had a little digital readout, just like in red, like super old school, like LED readout. And it would say Grandpa Drew. And so I made a hat band out of it. And I had it on my hat, and I had a straw cowboy hat. And I'd been wearing a straw cowboy hat for a long time. It wasn't performative. I wasn't wearing my straw cowboy hat because I was in a country bar. I wore it. But because on stage, I put this silly rhinestone cowboy shit on my head, right? And right as I got off the stage, some feller came up to me, and he's and he's dressed super proper country, right? And he's got himself a real nice Stetson hat, and he looks at me and he goes, and I keep in mind, this is Texas politeness, right? This is the ultimate insult, right? And we both knew what he was saying. I just got off the stage. I just sang my heart out about losing my grandfather, and this guy walks up and he's like, "Nice hat." And that was it, right? It was like, hey, he might as well just put a knife in my gut right there, or throw a beer bottle at me. Yeah,
that was fun. We had a great time, and we'll probably get back into that again. I was telling you about the idea I have of you coming on every once in a while and telling us one of these stories. That's the first time I heard the Amsterdam story. We'll come back to that one though, because I think that was I think it's worthy of its own episode in my opinion. But so you essentially, what I would call, you're making a comeback in the midst of this, and without fast forwarding too much, when did Flim Flam become an idea to you? I think, and we'll get into it. Actually, tell us what Flim Flam is, just so that we can get started.
Yeah, so the Flim Flam Review, if you've never seen the Flim Flam Review, and you just walk into the bar, and you saw it, you probably just have no idea what the fuck was happening other than something gorgeous in front of you. But if you were to try and describe it, you might be confused into thinking it was an open mic, only because there's a dozen singer-songwriters, and they play 3 songs each, and they go nonstop for 3 hours. But it's much more than that, because we have a house band. The house band is different every month. The house band doesn't know the songs, other than the fact that we play together once a month, and eventually we start to pick up on the general parts of our songs. But there's no band rehearsal. There's no Flim Flam band that's actually an official band. We are a songwriter collective is the way I brand it. And the entire point of it is for us to push each other as artists. And honestly, my vision, and still would be, is for it not even to just be music, right? And, I tried for a while, but it was hard to do at this one space. I would have your artwork hanging. I wanted to bring in visual artists, and I still do. I have a slide projection behind us the whole time. So I have a lot of your work there. I have all my artist friends in town who I really love, painters who are part of it. So I feel like you are part of the Flim Flam. I feel like
thank you.
Ryan Tanascoli, the painter, is part of the Flim Flam. These are all Flim Flam artists as far as I'm concerned. It's more than just music. It's an artist community, right? And the whole point is for us to push each other as artists. And you've certainly pushed me, and I hope that's come back. And that's what this is all about, right? And so what's the genesis of the Flim Flam? Well, that hotel room in Austin, if you really want to get to it. But more directly, it would be the Tin Can Country Club. And so the Tin Can Country Club was happened every Monday. And I had been performing as Grandpa Drew for quite a while. And with, some fair success. I got to play my favorite bars in Casbah in town and things like that. But I wasn't really all that recognized, in town, and I'm still not huge, but, people know me in San Diego now. I've established myself now as being a fairly well-known local artists. I get invited to local festivals and things like that, and so my profile is raised. And the Flim Flam is why. And I think that's really important to note, because I've been flailing around as Grandpa Drew for a long time. It wasn't until I stopped concentrating on myself and started concentrating on building a community around me that my own importance grew as well. Right?
Yes.
And so when I stopped focusing on me, and that started at the Tin Can Country Club. So the Tin Can Country Club was every Monday night, one microphone, one guitar. And when I say one guitar, I mean literally a single guitar, and it was a cheap, shitty, like one of the cheapest guitars you can imagine. I don't want to talk too much shit about somebody's instrument, but it was a Chinese copy of a Gibson Hummingbird, right? So it looked pretty on film, but it barely held tune. You know, you had a tune between every song. Didn't sound great. There was nothing particularly beautiful about the guitar. And you had some of San Diego's greatest songwriters, literally. And I build the Flim Flam that way every time, but this was literally what was happening. Is every Monday you would go into this room, and some of the greatest artists and songwriters in San Diego would go there on Mondays, and they would work out new material. And, you know, you would only have 2 songs each. And sometimes you'd do, you know, a song you knew that would kill, but most of the time we would do like maybe one ringer and then a brand new one. And there was no rules. It wasn't set that way. We just started at a certain point to inspire each other to want to do that, right? And so that was a turning point. I was no longer working in a vacuum. Grandpa Drew was a solo project, and then me and a cellist, but I was a sole creative outlet in that entire project. The Tin Can brought me into a community of artists and once I joined that community, I was almost immediately a complete level ahead. Well, I started hanging out with Mike Pope. You have to be a better artist. You see that guy, you have to be a better artist. You want to be better. You want to be a better singer. You want to be a better guitar player. You want to be a better songwriter. And for me, especially the songwriter part, that's really important. And so that weekly songwriter kind of gathering that we did grew into like this little secret in San Diego. And if you were in on it, that bar was packed, and it was just a little shotgun bar. But some really magical shows happened in that room. And so the Flim Flam grew for that. The same group of people. But from there, I saw an opportunity because something really magical began to happen. You would go into this room. We're all songwriters, right? So we're all artists. We're all narcissists who want to be performing anyways, always.
And you're all good.
They were all good.
I think that's important to say, too.
They were all good. And they were all real songwriters.
Yes.
And veterans and newbies alike. And that's what's really important, right? Everyone was talented, but there was a really good mix of talent, people who had traveled, you know, who had toured the country, had toured the world, and a mixture of people who were brand new. And that mix was beautiful. And the one mic and one guitar was this great equalizer, right? No matter who you were, you had to go up there and just bang it out on this shitty, untunable guitar. And it kind of brought us all to a same level in a way, even if we weren't. Yeah,
and because you guys, the way that you were saying it, you would, and it's all original material, at least for, I'd say 99% of it is original material. If it's a cover song, it's some sort of obscure way of doing it. But you guys presented new material that you had no idea how it was going to be accepted, or there was a lot of heart pouring and a lot of experimental work being done by people who you already know were good, and they're like, dude, I don't know if this is going to stick.
Absolutely.
And then you're playing it in front of your peers, and hey, I love all of you, but some of you guys, and we won't mention any names, some of you guys are brutally honest. No come up and no, hey, dude,
yeah,
maybe not so much. You know, and it's great to have.
Hey, you need that. You need brutal honesty. You need somebody to tell you, hey, man, you're talented, but that's not it. Go somewhere else. You know, I mean, not go somewhere else, like get the hell out. Like go somewhere else artistically.
Mm-hmm. Like,
maybe you need to pursue this. But even then, it wasn't even that. I mean, most of it was so organic and so beautiful.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
That Todd Day-Waite, he lives in New Orleans. Actually, I think he's in Tennessee now, but he lived in New Orleans for a long time. And Tom, so there would be, I forgot a crucial part of the format was for 2 hours, it'd just be one of us all doing our thing, you know, for two songs. And then after that, you'd have a featured performer. And so usually it would rotate between one of us, so we'd get a full set. So we could bang out like new material and then come up with a brand new set that we'd never played anywhere before, or at least, you know, a lot of the songs in our set, and we could mix them in with our old favorites and things like that. And so we'd kind of rotate through us who was the headliner that night, if you want to call it a headliner, a little grandiose, but it was the featured performer, right? But sometimes we'd have people come in from out of town. Alice Wallace, this amazing woman who yodels, right? And Todd Day Waite, who's this phenomenal singer from New Orleans. He came in and he sang, he left the next day. I wrote a song that I just stole from him, you know, like, and that was honestly the greatest gift that the country club gave me, was owning the right to just fucking steal. To just steal shit, you know, and not apologize for it, because all art is theft in some way, right? Nobody's wholly creating something from scratch; they're stealing it from somebody. And I know that I use the word steal, you know, to be provocative, but because that word is used a lot to stop people from creating, yes, right, or to critique them and say you suck, you don't deserve to be a creator because you stole this. Well, fuck you. We all stole everything. Yeah. And so it gave me the freedom to say, you know what? None of the people in this room, the greatest songwriters that I know, and I still will fucking die on this hill right now. Grandpadrew's getting into the F words. But no, I'll die on this hill right now that they're not just some of my favorite songwriters or some of the favorite songwriters in San Diego. These are some of the greatest living songwriters that I know. I will stack Mike Pope up against anybody on the planet today who's writing music. Yeah. And his guitar playing, his singing, his everything about him. And so this is the room you're surrounded by, and you cannot help but be a better artist just by being around those people. You want to be better. And so like Todd Day Waite came through. Next day I have a new song, Day Drinking. I play that song every Flim Flam now. It's one of my most popular songs. I wouldn't have written that song before then, because I would have been super self-conscious that I was aping Todd Day Waite's vocal style, that it was just a simple 1-4-5 song, and none of that matters to me. None of that matters. Yeah. Next time Todd came into town, I said, hey man, I stole this song from you, and I sang it to him. And he laughed, because he's like, I don't even get that. I don't even hear myself in that song, right? Yeah. And that's what art is, right? You steal something and then you put your voice on it. And that's what I really learned, that more important than anything else is just finding your own voice. Yeah. And that was really important.
I mean, I'm so glad you say that, because one of the things I think that I want to express too is that, you know, first of all, when you came to mind, once upon a time they asked David Bowie, of all people, you know, what do you think your greatest talent is? He goes, I'm a crafty thief. Yeah. You know, and again, we don't live in a vacuum to where, you know, no one, you know, when you ask someone who's your inspiration and stuff, even if you look at my photography, you know, I stole stuff from Jim Marshall, Danny Clinch, these photographers. That's all the style that I loved. And of course, you know, other classic photographers, Helmut Newton, of course, if you're into that other work that I do. But the more, and I've always said this, and I've said this before too, I think the more that you try to be, you're a human being with a good spirit, and if you want to be creative, that's unique. And the more you try to be someone else, I think the more you end up sounding like yourself, or being yourself. I'm never going to play guitar like, you know, Elmo James. Yeah. I'll play slide all day, every day, but the more that I try to be like Elmo James, the more I end up finding my own voice in a certain thing. And I think that's that stacked against having a community, which is, I hope that in this podcast, I'm trying to drive that as much as I can, is that you know, the no artist is an island sort of philosophy.
And I think that's really important. If you get nothing else out of this long rambling thing, is that we're all better for community. And I am my worst critic, right? And in the worst way too, because my criticism isn't even valid, right? It's just crippling. You know, it's just the worst of what you think of yourself, and it keeps me from being creative. You go into a room of other artists and they don't kick you out immediately, you can't help but at least feel a little bit validated. Like, holy shit, Mike Pope lets me like talk to him afterwards, and we talk about music together as if we're peers. And you get to do that enough, suddenly you will believe in yourself. Oh wait, I am a peer. I do deserve this. I am I am worthy of being treated like a peer with these people.
Yeah,
and that was really important. So that to get to the actual question you asked, how did the damn Flim Flam start? Right, is that bar and that thing and that group of people, the Tin Can Ale House and the Tin Can Country Club. Mike Pope started the Tin Can Country Club. Actually, I don't know if you know this, but he started it right up the hill in the same house, or right next door, I think, to where Larissa and Oobs used to live.
Oh, no way.
And I wasn't even hip to it at that point. It was on my own street. And they were just doing it in his backyard. And then Justin and Patrick got this bar downtown, not really downtown, in Bankers Hill. And so they moved it there. So it really started literally right here on my street. And so then that bar kind of took a fantastic shit and died. And during the process, right before it died, it's almost like I saw the writing on the wall, and I don't think I did, but you never know, right? But what was happening, we kind of going back to, like, we all learned each other's songs in these, from this, 2 years, 3 year time, I don't even know how long it was, at the Tin Can, and pretty soon something really spectacular would happen in that bar. The chorus would hit, and you would have a bar with 30 to 50 people. It wouldn't really hold more than 70, maybe. 100 people would really be jammed in there. And suddenly the entire bar would break out in harmonies.
Yeah.
Or everybody's using their rings to make a rhythm section on their beers, but not in a way that's just a bunch of drunk assholes, right? Because everybody in the fucking place is a musician.
Yeah.
And so people are adding the parts that they want to hear in the song, basically, right? And that 100% shaped some of the songs. You could hear it, like they'd be performed differently the next time they came out. And so it became very clear to me that that as magical as this thing was, there was a need for something beyond it in which we could interact with each other more, right? Because there was a definite beauty of just the one mic, one guitar place, and I miss that a lot. All of us kind of do, in a way. We'd really like to maybe at some point find another venue for that kind of idea, but it did prevent us from being able to interact very organically, other than just sitting in our seat with a whiskey in front of our hands doing,
Yeah.
So that's why I started the Flim Flam. And I originally actually called it the Tin Can Country Club All-Stars, or the Country Club All-Stars, I think was the original name. But then there was a whole deal where they weren't sure they wanted to have anything called that outside of that bar, and that was fine. So I had to come up with my own name, and it worked out great in the end, because then I could wholly take ownership of it.
Yeah.
Which is ironic to say about a collective, but I wasn't beholden to their vision anymore. I could create a vision for what I thought, or what I wanted to see, right? Which was a community of musicians supporting each other, pushing each other, which we already had, but also allowing ourselves to, in the moment, create something brand new in front of an audience. And I thought that there was something really magical and unique about that I hadn't seen before. And so it was really just a very simple thing of like, okay, well, we have one microphone, one guitar. What if we had 3 microphones and just 3 direct inputs? And then anybody could just walk up and plug in whichever instrument they wanted and start playing with the person next to them in the middle of their song. And then we would all have the agreement that you would allow that. None of your music is so precious that some idiot can't just come on up and just start fucking with it.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's very impressive to see you guys work to where, perfect example is the last one where Chad's got a song and he's just talking to the drummer. Great drummer, by the way, the last Flim Flam. I forgot the cat's name, but he was, first of all, he's a trooper. He was there for most of the show. But you guys just talk each other out. Hey, doing the Marty McFly, hey, it's a blues shuffle and B, watch me for the changes and try to keep up, sort of thing.
Yeah, 100%.
And it's real. You guys got to the point where if you don't know each other's songs very well, you guys catch on really quick.
Yeah, and there's, a lot of these guys come from a bluegrass background, and these guys are real musicians, right?
Oh, yeah.
Rock and roll musicians are fucking hacks, let's be honest.
Well,
And, they're just hacks stealing the blues and putting it through a louder distortion pedal. Grandpa Drew dismisses fucking rock and roll entirely in one sentence.
Yes.
But no, compared, I just had this discussion earlier about the Edge, actually, because everyone loves to shit on U2 right now, and somebody was talking about what an influential guitar player he was, and my point was that he was not a very good guitar player technically, but going back to what we talked about is finding your own voice, right? That sound is everywhere now, but there was nobody's guitar sounded like the Edge's guitar. Guy couldn't play shit, but he could play his effect pedals in a way that made a sound that was uniquely his. Yeah. And, in retrospect, you can crap all over U2 you want, but at the time, there's nothing that existed like that. And it wasn't technical proficiency, at least with his left or right hand on the guitar, that got him there. It was finding his voice through other means, and that's valid. And, you don't have to be Django Reinhardt, and you're not going to be. Nobody is going to be Django Reinhardt. Nobody is going to be Jimi Hendrix. You have to find out who you are and just do the best you can at presenting yourself that way. And that's really what the Flim Flam is all about, is all of us going there, laying our egos aside. I don't give a shit who you are. If it's your first time playing Flim Flam, you play first. So I've had, like, Louis XIV rolled in, right? They toured for a while. They were real big and popular. They came in, hey, man, can we play? Yeah, now.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can open up for somebody who doesn't even know how to play guitar. And I'm totally okay with that. I don't have a problem. There is no talent vetting for the Flim Flam. I don't make anybody audition. The only vetting is that you want to be a better artist and you're willing to work with other people for all of you to get there. That's it. The only way you get kicked out of the Flim Flam is not by supporting each other. If you don't support each other, then that's where you will. And there's no kicking out; it's all organic. You just flush out. You won't be hanging with us that long.
Yeah, you'll find out real quick. You don't fit in.
Exactly.
And
yeah, you either get the collective idea of what we're trying to do here, or you don't. And it's not a clique. It's not. It's nobody's too cool for anything. It's the opposite, right? And so, I mean, these things kind of, they sound like, there's tension between those two ideas, right? That we're a collective. It's not an open mic. It's a closed mic. If it were of anything like that, but it's not even closed, it's open. We're always allowing more people in. But you don't just get to walk in with a guitar and say, I'm going to get up there and center this whole thing around me. Yeah. And we get that. We get people who see it and they think it's an open mic and they don't know anybody and nobody knows them. And it's not about, fuck you, I don't know you. It's about, you need to become part of our community and not just come in and see that we have built something and it's a beautiful thing, and who wouldn't want to center themselves right in the middle of that, right? And anyone who wants to is welcome, but you don't just get to march in and demand it. You have to show that you really want to be part of the community, that you get it. So there's no audition except for, I want to see you at shows supporting each other. Not just the Flim Flam, I want to see you at other shows. I want to see you at all these other artists. We go and see each other's shows. We know each other. If all you're doing is showing up at the Flam, we don't ever see you support anybody else, we're going to get that real quick,
Yeah, and, again, you just don't get to plug in. You do have to participate in the community. One of the things that I wanted to hit on, too, as far as being part of the community and watching people grow and you guys coming up beautifully together and growing as songwriters and artists, one of the things I think that we talked a little bit about when we were up in your
Idlewild
airship. What's Superman's fucking thing? The Fortress of Solitude or whatever.
Yeah, totally.
Fortress of Solitude. One of the things that we were talking about is songwriting, and I think that one of the things that we were talking is like writing a song is easy. It's writing a song that everybody can hook up to. And I think a lot of people, and I don't know if maybe you are maybe were really self-conscious as to what kind of songs you were writing at first to what kind of songs you're playing out now. As far as taking songwriting as a microcosm for having a creative outlook, like anything that you create, you're really going to be self-conscious, but I think the key word might be consistency. I think at one point you've written, whether we've heard all the songs that you've written or not, it sounds like you are continually writing something, whether we get to listen to it or not.
I think that's okay. So the country club was really important in getting a little more discipline on that front. Like I set a goal for myself for the country club, and I've set that goal down. I need to pick it up maybe again for the Flim Flam. I would try and write a new song every week if I could to present to the Tin Can Country Club. It was always every Monday night. And so I would always try and write a song, and I didn't care if it sucked or not. Just write it, perform it. And so I wrote a bunch of songs during that time that probably I only ever played that one time. And, there were some ringers and there were some duds. And that gave me a lot of confidence to fail, too. You have to have the confidence to fail and know that that doesn't mean you're a failure, right? And artists are sensitive people, It's hard for it. We get down on ourselves, I mean, it's funny because there's all this push and pull, and that's the way life is, right? That's where life is between this push and pull. But, I'm a narcissist, but I'm also incredibly insecure. And those things are hand in hand. You don't need that kind of love from everybody if you're not lacking it inside, right? A little bit. And so my ability to jump around on stage looks like confidence, looks like a massive amount of confidence. The ability of me right now on this microphone to speak with declarative, confident sentences makes it seem like I am like the most confident person in the world, but I'm not. And I think we all kind of feel that way, right? We all have that kind of those things pulling between us. And so art is kind of, I guess, harnessing that same idea, right? But the construction of me writing a song every week, that started with the Flim Flam, and I haven't been as good about it, but I do write. And this is something that, you go to college to become a writer or do anything. Well, if it's writing. When I went to school, I studied, I read. I was an English major. I was a theater major. I changed my major a bunch of times, but it was always some sort of writing thing. I was the editor of the newspaper, my college newspaper. So I've always been a writer. And so I always say that whether I'm putting it to music or not, I'm always writing. And I do a lot of writing up at the airship up in Idlewild in my little fortress of solitude. But not a whole lot of music, not necessarily a lot of music writing. I've written one song up there in the last year. I like it. It's a good one, and that's all you need. But I write a lot. And so I think that's really important, is to just keep working that muscle. That's the one thing that educators will always tell you. Writing is a muscle. And if you don't use it, it'll atrophy. And that's, I think, the true of any art, right? I guess that goes back to your 10,000 hours kind of thing,
Exactly. What I wanted to hit on, I think, right before we hit record here today, was one, obviously you are still gigging out. You still have a bunch of shows. As a matter of fact, next week, well, you got a Flim Flam tomorrow, and you have, next week, you have a show with
Julia Sage and the Bad Hombres.
The Bad Hombres that are come full circle. The Transfers playing a show. But I think what I wanted to hit on too first is, and we're probably going to get lofty on this and probably burn a lot of people. But again, one of the reasons that I needed to have you on this podcast and talk to you is because you are still here. You're still doing it. And a lot of people that we know, and I've made this argument before, especially like in the photography business, they don't make money, they stop creating. And a lot of people that I think we've, without, trying to point any fingers, I think we know a lot of creative people that could have done something, but because there wasn't any money in it, they go, fuck that, I don't want to do it anymore. I think at one point we have to realize that, make the argument that we do deserve to get compensated for our work, but at the same time, it can't be the only reason we're creating, right? We have to still continually try to push through. I mean, because the argument could be said, you started a label, you started a record, unless you're hiding money of it, it doesn't seem like you made millions off of your first record.
I've made nothing off anything I've ever made creatively. I mean, to me, my goal at this point in life is to break even. I don't want to put money into this thing. And as long as I'm not putting money into my art and it's actually earning enough money to pay for itself, that's kind of my, I mean, and some people might think that's a pretty sad goal, and maybe it is, I don't know, but that's where I am right now. I mean, I would love to get paid. I would love to I would love to make millions. My wife and I talk about it all the time. We're up at Idlewild and we're just like, just one of these goddamn songs, if it would just hit, we wouldn't have to come back down the mountain and go to work again. Yeah. And, that'd be great, but that's not why I do it. Mm-hmm. I do it because I tried not doing it for a decade and it almost killed me. Mm-hmm. And I almost lost everything that was precious to me because I didn't know what was precious to me anymore. And so I do it because I have to. That's the only way that I can interact with this world in a meaningful way where I'm actually not just a piece of shit. And, not to get too heavy, it's pretty interesting, but, like my alcohol abuse has gone down so much. I mean, it's funny because people think about rock and roll and they think about artists and musicians and you're partiers and you go out and you get nuts. And certainly I'm not going to deny that there have been plenty of shenanigans, and there still are. We have after parties here, and sometimes they go to sunup. But I have written a song most recently, and I'm still working on it. I've played it a couple times, and it's called "Know How to Drink." Right, and the lyric is, "I finally think I know how to drink, how to savor the taste of something fine." And music has allowed me to realize that. Right, that. I mean, we love to party. It's fun, man. I love to do things in excess. I always will. But there's also a price for excess, right? And so finding that balance is everything. But also the answer isn't shutting yourself down to all of it either, right? And otherwise, that's when you start becoming a lot more abusive in your partying, right? And so I still party, but now it's a celebration. It's not me trying to kill all the demons that make me want to kill myself at night, right? Now, when I party and I drink, I am celebrating a community that I love. I'm celebrating in a room with music that's happening all the time. I have to give a huge amount of credit to my wife, Allison. She, one day, just out of nowhere, she's like, I think we need to get rid of our dining room table. And to me, it was motivated. I was right on board with it immediately because your dining room table, who eats at their dining room table anymore? It's just a place that you gather all your shit, right? And it just becomes a giant table where your mail collects and everything else. So I was happy to get rid of it just so it's one less flat surface for us to just pile up shit. But her answer was, no, let's make this a music parlor. You need a place to keep your instruments. You have people come over. We need a place for people to play collectively. And then her mom moved out here and we got the piano and we put that in there and it all just kind of came together, right? Perfectly. So now we have after parties. The Flim Flam tomorrow is a marathon. It starts at 5:00. I start drinking at 5:00. But I'm also playing music, right? And I nurse that drink. And I will do shots with anybody throughout the entire show, but I'm also a little more careful about where I go because I have something else that's important to me. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to just destroy it with drunken idiocy. And art really did save me that way. And it really has brought me to a place where, I struggle to say I'm happy because we all struggle with that, right? And I think that I don't even know if happiness is a goal we should pursue. It's fleeting, right? You can't, it's one of those things that you can't just reach out and grab. It just comes and you have to appreciate it. But there's certainly like living in abject misery that you can pull yourself out of, right? And art certainly did that to me, for me.
Yeah. And I think that hits to the importance of, if you have a talent of some kind, keep nurturing it somehow, whether you're making money from it or not. And I think it's important because my last episode, I was just talking about how, you need a lot of us, even when they start making money, don't know how to take care of it or don't know how to properly manage it. And that's another issue for another time. But
let's get into that right now, because I think that, that brings something that's very much on my mind. Like, look, art, there's two things. On one, a true artist just can't not do it, right? Whether somebody pays you or not, you just have to do it. That said, we need to stop giving away the store. We need to start letting people know that we know what our worth is. I am damn tired of being the lowest paid person in the bar when it's my music that's drawing everybody there, that's paying everybody's salary.
Yeah.
So if I'm paying the bartender and I'm paying the doorman, and I'm paying everybody there, why the fuck am I not the highest paid person there? I'm the boss. But I'm not. I'm treated like dirt. And that needs to change. And it won't change until artists start demanding it. So I don't want to devalue the role of money. It's not going to be your primary focus. It should not be your primary focus as an artist. But also, I would be a far greater artist if I made more money because I could dedicate more time to my art.
Yeah.
And so if people want great artists out there, you have to pay them not to be fucking mortgage brokers. A mortgage broker is what pays my goddamn mortgage, not my art. And so if you want me to make more art, I need to be paid enough that I don't have to do this other fucking job. And it's not going to happen until we demand it.
And to your point, I think there's a sort of culture that's been around to where, and I mean, I certainly feel it on my end of the camera, if you will, to where, let's just take a perfect example of what you said, to where, let's just call them bar owners, for lack of a better name, don't appreciate the amount of people that come to their establishment because of the entertainment that they have. And some
bar owners do get that. I do want to point that out.
Yeah,
but way too many do not.
Yeah, and it sometimes it outweighs a little bit to where, like, man, I don't like playing here because that guy's a dick.
Absolutely.
And he shortchanged us, or what have you. And it's sort of almost, I don't want to say, it's almost baked in a little bit to the culture to where, like, I shouldn't have to pay you for your talent because, and I'm guilty of this too. I am guilty of not saying, this is what I'm worth and this is what you need to pay me.
We're all guilty, and that's part of the Flim Flam. Like, I am trying so hard to like make people realize their worth and demand it in financial terms. I just had a negotiation earlier for a show that we're doing out in the desert, and it's not cool to talk about money in art, right? When you're supposed to be, if you're a real artist, you don't care about money.
Exactly.
And I even said it earlier, right? But that's not true. It can't be your motivating factor for making art, but it's still important. We all need to eat. Mm-hmm. And you can't make art if you're starving. I mean, the starving artist thing is a fucking joke, man. If you're starving, I've been starving. You don't have time to make art. You're just trying to eat.
Yeah.
And so I kind of reject that whole model. And as much as that 10 years I think of that I walked away from music, and I think about what a lost 10 years that is, and I wonder about where I could have been if I'd have done something different, or if I'd have dedicated that decade to art. It was also very instructive. Like, I've mentioned it multiple times, and you won't hear artists say this too often. They don't want to talk about their day jobs because they want to be presented as just an artist. Like, that's all they are, right? I'm an artist, and it makes, it's part of this mystique that you're supposed to create, right? But we all have fucking day jobs, man, and none of them are glorious. They all suck, man. Jobs suck. And so, that said, I learned a lot. Like, so as a mortgage brokers are some of the most hated people on the planet. They are lawyers, and mortgage brokers are consistently, those are the two jobs that when you ask people what are the most least respected jobs of any human being on the planet, I mean, I thought it was musician. I found that there was at least one.
That's another level.
Exactly. Yeah. That said, people can hate lawyers. They fucking pay them.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
You can hate a mortgage broker all you want. I get paid as a mortgage broker. And what this job did for me was made me realize that my work is worth something, and goddamn it, you should pay me for it. And I learned how to unequivocally say, this is what I'm worth, and you need to pay it. You need to give it to me. And it doesn't have to be arrogant. It doesn't have to be, I know I said that in a very aggressive way, but it doesn't have to be that, right? It's just, it's a matter of fact. Look, this is what I'm worth. This is what it takes. And if you don't want to pay me that, then you don't deserve my talent. You don't deserve to have a band at your bar.
I think that's another great point that you make. It's okay to say no.
It is so okay to say no. Stop taking shitty gigs. Mm-hmm. Stop taking gigs for exposure. Stop. Unless that exposure is very real, and it never is. It's almost all bullshit. And it's, nobody runs a restaurant for exposure. Nobody runs a business for exposure. But we're supposed to run our artistic endeavors for exposure?
Yeah.
That's absurd. It's absurd.
And yet you're the reason people are coming in. And spending money at that establishment.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, they recognize our value. They know our value. But, okay, I'm going to defend the restaurants and the bars a little bit, though, because the money is tough. It's tight, right? To run a restaurant, it's a shoestring thing. It's a very difficult thing, right? A bar maybe is a little easier. But, these... the bar owners that I work for, they're not super wealthy. I've been to their homes, right? And, fuck it, I'll name names. Tim Mays has a nice home, but he's not living in some mansion, He's... it's a nice home with a good patch of land, but it's just a house. It's nothing spectacular. I mean, I love it. It's an awesome mid-century house, but it's most certainly not a mansion. And so... I know a little bit about some of these bar owners. I'm friends with them now. So I know their economics more or less. And especially as a mortgage broker now too, I know a lot about everybody. All right. I mean, my friends come to me and literally just give me their tax returns all the time as a matter of course of my business. So I've seen that side of the world in a way that I brought that back to music. And it's like, okay, it's time for us as artists to start saying the same thing that anybody else would do at any other job. You know my value. Why aren't you paying me my value? You just said, look, they know our value. They wouldn't be hiring us. Our value is when we're there, more people come in and buy their drinks. More people come in and eat their food. So you guys see our value. I'm saying this to every venue out there right now. You know our value or you wouldn't be calling me. So fucking pay me my value. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
And look, I understand that you're not going to make $20,000 for a gig at a restaurant or a local dive bar.
Damn it.
Right? But you shouldn't be the lowest paid person in the bar.
Yeah. And, that's hopefully a lot of us will take that to heart. The last thing, we can obviously be going on forever, but I did want to talk about, it's been better part of 2 decades now. You have a gig coming up. Again, the Flim Flam is tomorrow, and then you have another gig. Do you feel as this, for how long you've been on this, is there a sense of satisfaction? Is there a sense of gratitude? Is there a sense of some sort of accomplishment that you are just still going and don't plan on stopping? Again, to break off a little bit, despite of not being a millionaire at what it is as far as being a musician. I mean, how do you feel about shit? I'm playing at the Casbah next week.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, first of all, I mean, playing the Casbah, look, this is a little dive bar, right? It's both things. It's just a little dive bar. It has a capacity of, 250, 300 people. But it's also a culturally incredibly significant part of San Diego. And I've been going to Tim Mays, Maysy Presents shows since I was in high school. And Tim Mays was the music scene when I was in high school. He didn't own any bars. He was doing them at North Park Lions Club. He was doing them at Jackie Robinson's YMCA right here in my neighborhood. He was doing shows wherever the hell he could, and a lot of times he couldn't do more than one because the band's trashed the place and he wasn't welcomed back, so he moved a lot, right? And here's a funny thing. So Tim Mays he got a reputation in the 80s. They called him $10 Tim. And it was an insult because most shows were $5 and he was charging 10. And so there was this impression that, that maybe Tim Mays was somehow taking advantage of the scene among certain people. But among the people who really mattered, they knew, right? X was coming down and playing his shows. That's a whole different level than hiring, me out of high school. X was an established band. They were a signed band. They had record labels out. They were internationally known, and he was bringing them to San Diego when nobody else was. So fuck you if you're going to complain that that's $10, right? You have to pay those artists. And so it all goes right back to what we're saying, right? You can't pay the artists if the audience isn't willing to pay either. And that's an issue too. Door prices are still $10. You go to I'm talking about 1986, Tim Mays throwing shows for, or maybe 88, I don't know, but throwing shows for $10. If I go to the Casbah tonight, it might be $15.
Yeah.
That's got to change. That's not sustainable. We have not kept up with inflation when it comes to taking care of our artists.
Yeah. I think that's, most things, I would say most things, I don't want to say anything, but most things that happen at the Casbah, it's another $25, $30, fucking Mudhoney played at the fucking soda bar with the Meat Puppets,
because Tim Mays owns that place too now. He has a piece of it.
So.
Oh, so that's the booking
awesome.
power, right? No, I don't want to take anything away from Corey. By the way, that guy's awesome. But you know, Maisie has decades of booking.
That was $40, man.
Yeah,
I saw the big box band, the touring. You know, my favorite band. I had to pay upwards of $130, $140, $150 to see them play, and those guys were notorious for having the lowest ticket prices out there of a touring band. It's not really possible as much anymore, but now you can see great music for $40, and god damn it, it's worth it. I couldn't make it, but
I paid. Okay, so I just went. Allison and I just went and saw Bjork. And you know, look, man, I want to be careful because I have now finally I grew up lower income. I'm not that anymore, right? I'm not wealthy, but I guess upper middle class. I don't know, but I do okay. I'm not struggling to eat, and so I can afford some nicer things, right? So I want to be careful that I'm not like waving my privilege around and being like, oh, I spent $250 to go see a fucking concert the other day. But I did. I spent $250 to go see Bjork, and it was worth every damn dollar. And anybody who thinks that that's too much to pay for a concert of the scale that I saw Bjork put on, which was one of the most phenomenal. I mean, it was like seeing the opera. This wasn't just somebody at a piano in the corner of a fucking bar. This was, and by the way, some of the best shows I've ever seen in the world are somebody in a corner of a bar and a piano. I don't want to discount that, but that's not the same level of production. It's not the same level of gathering an entire symphony, gathering people, dancers and, dance troops, and doing choreography for fucking months to put this show together. And, you have light guys that need to get paid. You have roadies that need to get paid. And we can't pay these people what they deserve to get paid if the fucking audience isn't willing to pony up at the door. And Bjork is not a young artist. So people who like her are generally older and more established. Fuck you for complaining about her ticket prices. Pay $250 and go see that show. You'd pay a shitload to go see the opera. You'll pay a shitload to see all of these other things. It's time for us to start valuing these artists and pony up and pay it.
Yeah, and I hate to say it, but especially during these times too, even though I have my issues with sort of, depends on who it is too, and when it's out. I think during a pandemic, it's very irresponsible for somebody to be charging you that much when people struggle, want to see you play, but are struggling to pay rent, and you want to go put on a show and charge $300 for it. I think that's a kind of tough sell, but
I understand that perspective 100%, and I get that too. But these are the struggles that we're talking about, though. That's it. Like, so how do we find that balance?
And I think that's key too. But to just kind of more or less at least close this segment, because I think I'm keeping you here too long for today, because we can go on forever. We will go on forever. But the sense of accomplishments and satisfaction on there, like, I don't want to ask you, where do you see yourself in 5 years in this one? But is it still fun to go on stage? Is it still fun to create after so long? Is it still fun to say, man, I got a show every day, or at least for the next 2 weeks, I got shows coming up? I mean, how cool is that?
It's super cool, and it's also exhausting. And I want to make sure that people understand both sides of it, right? How satisfied am I where I am in my career as a musician? If I'm not entirely sure that was your question either. I think it was more like what I got out of it.
But either way,
I am extremely proud of what I've created with the Flim Flam. I'm incredibly proud, and I was getting really, really burnt out. I'm in effectively 2 bands, and I run this songwriter collective. Before the pandemic, I was really getting burnt out from it. It was just becoming too much. All of it was becoming too much. I couldn't find, again, balance. We always go back to this word, right? Because that's always what we're trying to find in life. That's where we're happiest, is when we can balance all these things. So yeah, I was really burnt out of that. But as soon as it stopped, I realized how important it was to everybody. And it's pretty funny that during the pandemic, suddenly everyone realized how much they give a shit about art and how much they were willing to pay for it. Suddenly they thought. But now we're back into the world, and all those people have proven to be completely full of shit, right? They're not out there supporting the arts like they said they were going to do. They're not out there paying more money to see shit. That said, there's a lot of people struggling. I don't want to discount this, right? But also, consumer spending is at an all-time high. It's nuts. People are spending money like crazy. So, I mean, not everybody, and there's people struggling. And believe me, I've been those people, and I empathize with that. And I'll always consider myself a working class musician, whether my economic status reflects that or not. That's always going to be my ethos. But people who can afford to do things need to start ponying up. That's what I'll just get at right there. Look, man, if you can't afford it, come talk to me. I'll put you on the list.
Yeah.
But if you can afford a freaking $50,000 car, you can afford to pay $25 to see me and not 10. And
that's fair. Yeah.
And so yeah, that's where I'm at. But as far as my own satisfaction, I'm very, very I'm very proud of what I've created with the Flim Flam, and that break in the pandemic was kind of a key time because I was starting to lose how much I appreciated it, and I was starting to lose seeing how much it meant to other people, right? And it really means a lot to a lot of people, and people have been so, especially, I talked shit a little earlier about people not being appreciative after the pandemic, but that's not entirely true. First of all, our attendance has been through the roof, and people just come up to me almost in tears, like all the time, to tell me how important this is to them. And my entire perspective about what success has changed because of this, right? When you're younger, everyone wants to be famous, right? I mean, and shit, I wouldn't turn it down, but that's not why I'm doing it. I'm not doing it to be famous anymore, and I'm doing it to get rich. And what I've created in my community is super important, and it's important to my community. And it's not just important to the musicians in my community. It's important to my entire community. I walk around in my community now, and people come up to me where I'm in a restaurant, and, it's not the paparazzi. It's not the same as being some movie star, but it's not entirely dissimilar. People come up to me all the time and just want to tell me how much what I do means to them. And if you have any humility at all, you can't help but be touched by that and realize what you're doing is important and be grateful for that. And so, yeah, I'm very proud, but I'm also grateful because it's much larger than me. I am a better artist because I have surrounded myself with artists who are better than me and not as good as me, both, right? Because something can be learned from both. Mm-hmm. And that's why I really love the Flim Flam, is that mixture. Because when you become an established artist, let's use that word instead of, because you're not necessarily famous, but you've spent a lot of time, and you can book shows now regularly and play most of the venues you want to play. After a certain point, you can get a little disillusioned. Everything can become a job. And so the Flim Flam really helped me realize that the scale isn't as important. Like, we all think that we need to become, the next Beatles. But what I do in my community is important. And it's important in my community. And that's enough. That's enough. That should be enough for anybody to be able to say that I've affected my direct community in a way that's positive, that everyone around me appreciates. That's a huge accomplishment. I'm really, really proud of that.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say, and I don't know if you'd agree with it or not, it's like when you are part of that community, not only are you in touch, but as you were saying before, your creative output, whether it's songwriting or anything else, expands and increases. Yeah. Who knows how many times
exponentially.
Over. Yeah. And I hope that's something that we can all take home. Is like, man, if you're a carpenter, find a carpenter's guild, or do they have those still? I mean, go with your fellow carpenters, learn how to do things. If you're and yes, I keep saying porn stars. If you're a porn star, find out how to be the best porn star you can be, and get your community going. If you're a songwriter, if you're a photographer, and I think that's something that lacks a little bit, like in the photography community. There's just, unless we're talking about film, which is don't even get started on that too. I mean, some of these guys are just as bad as wedding photographers. But if there's this community where we can all share and grow from each other, I think that's just invaluable. It's just something that we all need to learn from that.
And I think that the subject of your photography has helped you on that front a lot, right? Because the nature of photography is far more a solo act, right? It's just you and your camera lens staring at something, and it really is just your perspective. You don't consult with a band to figure out what snapshot you're going to take, right? But because of your subject matter, you've become a part of these communities too. And I think that that's something that's really important and that I really want to try and breed more within the Flim Flam is this kind of this mixing of artists of all different types. Yeah. Photographers, painters. Like the whole idea, Allison, when she cleaned out that coffee table, she called it a music parlor immediately. And it was like the days of that, right? That we used to have these salons, where you would have artists of all different types who would mix with each other,
and it's exactly what it is, and it's just I wish everybody would be able to come by and have a Flim Flam day because
that's what we're doing. Yeah, we're trying to do this salon. So tomorrow we'll start at 5:00. It's a 3-hour show nonstop, and then we'll come back here and we'll go at least till 1 a.m. at the earliest, and then often more like 4, 5, 6 and sunrise.
Yeah, I've never been here till 1 a.m.
God bless my neighbors for putting up with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a marathon and it's all day long. So I start at 5:00, and sometimes I won't go to bed till 5 a.m. or even later. So it's at least a 12-hour gig. It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a whole lot. It's a lot to do once a month, especially when we're hosting our house. And that was where I kind of got to be a little burnout too, is right? Because it's not just I go to a show, I play a show. I go to the show, I host it, I'm up there. Part of the shtick that we didn't mention is, between all the artists, I get up there and I just, you'll figure out real quick from this podcast, I know how to talk. I can keep talking forever, infinitely. But that's part of it is because you have a lot of setup time between the artists, right? You can't put 12 artists in 3 hours without there being some downtime. So part of it is me as the MC just being obnoxious in the middle of the thing, right? Calling the audience assholes and getting them riled up and being a cheerleader and all of that. Like, this push and pull between insulting and inspiring. So that's a huge part of it as well, right? So it's physically exhausting. I do this thing for 3 hours and then I come home and then and before that 3 hours, I have to clean my house. I spend 2 days getting my house cleaned so I can have an after party. And so there's a lot of physical labor in it. Just loading up all the shit into my car. People have no idea how much physical labor musicians do.
The worst roadie in the world helps you out sometimes.
Sometimes you have a photographer who's trying. You're trying to get this photographer who's never carried anything heavier than his camera to pick up your amplifier. He doesn't know what the fuck he's doing.
It's tough, man. It's tough. But yeah. Well, again, thank you so much. I think we're going to. That's a good place to stop because like I said, we could probably go on, and I think this is just probably a part one of talking to you. But man, thank you so much for giving me your time and talking to me. And
always, D man, you will always have my ear, brother.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
And everyone else will always have my voice, whether they want it or not. Because I'm not going to shut up.
All right, thank you, man.
Thank you, Danny. I love you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. That was a conversation with Grandpa Drew. And I think that I'm going to have a couple bonus episodes with Grandpa Drew here. I think that's definitely a multi-part series. He's got a lot of great stories that I need to document and put in here. And hopefully I'll get a chance to do those. But Grandpa Drew, as you can tell here, is just a never-ending fountain of information as far as the music industry and how it works. And he's been in this game for a very long time, so he's definitely got a lot of information that I want to know about. So hopefully, he'll share it with us. But again, thank you so much for tuning in. I will put the Flim Flam notes in the show notes. And you can, it's at the Whistle Stop Bar in San Diego, the first Saturday of every month. I suggest that all of you come out and support. It is a really good show. I'm going to try and be there now that I'm in the vicinity. I'm going to try and be there as much as I possibly can and document that scene until forever. They actually have a really cool show. And I'll post this if you follow me on Instagram or on Twitter. They have a really cool show also coming up on next weekend, and I'll put that up. But it's like a camp out in the ranch out there, And man, I'm hopefully I'll be able to make that. I think that that's going to be really good. And of course, hopefully by the time this gets up and running, today is the 7th of June. I hope to have this up and running today, and so that you can have time and remind you that there's a show at the Casbah. I don't know if it's sold out. I think it might be sold out, but Grandpa Drew is playing with Transfer at the Casbah, and that'll be a great reunion to have. All right, you guys, take it easy. Talk to you soon, and enjoy your youth.